A woman like you doesn't belong on a bike like this." The words cut through the humid North Carolina night, just as the flashing blue lights painted the highway in waves of color. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. The distant hum of traffic faded. The wind rolling across the asphalt lost its voice. Even the low growl of the red Ducati Panigale idling beneath the overpass sounded smaller somehow. Ava Johnson slowly removed her helmet, revealing tired eyes and tightly braided hair damp from a long day that had felt more like a long month. She had spent the last 8 months living inside a federal investigation so sensitive that only a handful of people in Washington even knew it existed. Tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight was supposed to be simple. Just a quiet ride home after finally being granted 72 hours off duty. Instead, she found herself standing beside the shoulder of Interstate 85 under the glare of police lights, while 3 officers studied her as if she were a puzzle they had already decided the answer to. Officer Ryan Mitchell walked around the Superbike with slow, deliberate steps, his flashlight tracing across the glossy red bodywork. The machine looked expensive because it was. Every polished surface reflected the flashing patrol lights like liquid fire. Ryan folded his arms. Registration. Ava calmly reached into her jacket and handed it over. Her movements were steady, measured, professional. Years of federal training had taught her that emotions solved very little when assumptions had already taken control of a situation. Ryan glanced at the paperwork, then back at her. His expression barely changed. "This your bike?" Ava nodded. "Yes, sir." The answer should have ended the conversation. It didn't. Ryan looked toward the second officer standing near the patrol car. The younger man shrugged slightly. Ava noticed the exchange. She noticed everything. The nervous tapping of a thumb against a utility belt. The quick glance toward the bike. The subtle skepticism hidden beneath forced professionalism. She had seen those looks before, more times than she cared to count. A tractor-trailer thundered past, shaking the air. The red and blue lights danced across the wet pavement left behind by an earlier rain shower. Somewhere overhead, clouds drifted across a pale moon. "Mind stepping over here?" Ryan asked. Ava complied without argument. The highway felt strangely empty despite the occasional passing headlights. A few drivers slowed as they passed, curious about the scene unfolding beneath the overpass. Some even lifted phones toward their windows. Ava kept her focus forward. She had learned long ago that dignity was often quiet. Ryan studied the registration again. "Interesting bike for someone like you." Ava met his eyes. She didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. The silence stretched between them. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Ryan broke it first. "Where are you coming from?" "Work." "What kind of work?" Ava hesitated for only a second. Not because she lacked an answer. Because she understood the danger of giving the wrong one. Certain truths carried weight. Others carried consequences. "Long day," she replied. Ryan's jaw tightened. He seemed dissatisfied by her calmness. Some people expected explanations. Others expected defensiveness. Ava offered neither. The wind shifted again. Across the highway, a roadside billboard flickered against the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly beyond the horizon. Ryan handed the registration to Sergeant Daniel Brooks, who had just arrived on scene. Brooks scanned the paperwork, then looked directly at Ava. The older officer's expression was unreadable, yet something about the way he stared suggested that his mind was already forming conclusions. Conclusions built not from evidence, but from appearances. Ava felt the familiar weight settle into her chest. Not fear, not anger, something older, something she had carried since childhood. The understanding that sometimes people saw a story before they saw a person. And standing beneath the cold pulse of those flashing lights, neither officer had any idea they were looking at one of the lead agents on a federal operation that could change careers, destroy criminal networks, and expose secrets powerful people had spent years trying to bury. Ava Johnson stood quietly beside the patrol car while the night air carried the scent of rain-soaked pavement and diesel exhaust from the distant highway. The flashing lights reflected across the polished surface of her motorcycle, turning the deep red paint into shifting waves of crimson and blue. She kept her hands relaxed at her sides, her expression calm, but her mind was somewhere far away from Interstate 85. 8 months earlier, she had walked into a federal briefing room in Washington, District of Columbia, carrying a plain black folder and a cup of coffee that had gone cold before the meeting even started. By the time she walked out, her life had changed. The assignment had been unlike anything she had worked before. Long hours, constant travel, endless reports, weeks spent earning trust from people who never knew her real purpose. Entire nights without sleep. Entire weekends disappearing into surveillance reports and encrypted communications. Most people imagined federal investigations as dramatic moments and sudden breakthroughs. The truth was usually quieter. It lived inside patience, inside details, inside thousands of pieces that only made sense when viewed together. Ava had spent months putting those pieces together. Along the way, she had missed birthdays, family gatherings, and the funeral of a former mentor she deeply respected. She had accepted all of it because the mission mattered. Some cases changed headlines. This one had the potential to change lives. Earlier that morning, she had finally received clearance to step away for a few days. 72 hours. It was not much, but it felt like freedom. She remembered leaving the federal building before sunrise, the city still wrapped in darkness. She remembered walking through the parking garage and seeing her Ducati waiting under the fluorescent lights. For the first time in months, she had smiled. Riding had always been her escape. Not because of speed, not because of attention, because the road gave her something rare. Silence, control, space to breathe. Growing up in Baltimore, she had learned early that life did not offer many quiet places. Her mother worked 2 jobs. Bills were always waiting. Expectations were always low. Too many. People looked at her neighborhood and decided they already knew the ending to every story that started there. Ava had spent years proving them wrong. School became her refuge. Books became her allies. Determination became her language. Every scholarship, every exam, every promotion had been earned one step at a time. Nothing had been handed to her. Nothing had come easily. Yet standing beside the patrol car now, she recognized the familiar feeling of being measured before being understood. Officer Ryan Mitchell continued speaking with Sergeant Brooks near the front bumper. Occasionally, both men glanced toward her. Their voices were low, hidden beneath the sound of passing traffic. Ava could not hear the conversation, but she could read the body language. Doubt, suspicion, assumptions. The same invisible current she had encountered throughout her career. A cold breeze swept beneath the overpass. Somewhere above, water dripped steadily from concrete beams left damp by the earlier storm. Ava looked toward the dark horizon. Beyond the highway and the scattered lights of nearby towns sat a small house she had not seen in months. A refrigerator filled with food she never had time to eat. A stack of unopened mail waiting on the kitchen counter. Simple things. Ordinary things. The kind of things she had spent months dreaming about while buried inside a case that never seemed to end. She wanted nothing more than to go home. Yet something told her this stop was not over. Not even close. Because while Ryan Mitchell believed he was inspecting a motorcycle and questioning a tired rider, he had no idea he was standing a few feet away from a woman carrying responsibilities far larger than anything visible beneath the flashing lights. And somewhere inside the saddlebag attached to that motorcycle rested an item connected to an investigation so sensitive that losing it could create consequences neither officer could possibly imagine. Sergeant Daniel Brooks folded the registration paperwork and slipped it beneath his arm as he slowly approached Ava. The older officer moved with the confidence of someone who had spent decades wearing a badge. His boots echoed softly against the pavement while the rotating patrol lights reflected across the silver buttons of his uniform. For several seconds he said nothing. He simply studied her. Ava recognized the look immediately. It was not curiosity. It was evaluation. The kind that happened when people believed they already understood the person standing in front of them. Behind Brooks, Officer Ryan Mitchell continued circling the Ducati. His flashlight beams swept across the wheels, the exhaust system, the carbon fiber panels, lingering on details that seemed to bother him more with every passing minute. The motorcycle represented something he could not easily fit into the assumptions already forming inside his mind. Brooks finally stopped a few feet away. "You said you were coming home from work." Ava nodded. "Yes, sir." "Where exactly?" His tone sounded polite, but there was pressure underneath it. Ava glanced briefly toward the highway. A line of headlights moved through the darkness like distant stars. "I have been traveling," she answered carefully. Brooks narrowed his eyes. "That does not answer the question." Ava remained calm. Every instinct told her to reveal her credentials and end the conversation. It would have taken less than 10 seconds. Yet federal protocol existed for a reason. Certain investigations depended on secrecy. Certain names were not supposed to appear in routine databases. Certain operations survived only because very few people knew who was involved. So she stood quietly beneath the flashing lights and chose patience. Ryan suddenly called out from beside the motorcycle. "Sergeant, you might want to see this." Brooks turned immediately. Ava felt a small knot tighten inside her stomach. Not fear. Concern. Ryan was crouched beside one of the saddlebags attached to the bike. The black compartment contained travel supplies, paperwork, and a secure storage case. Nothing illegal. Nothing dangerous. But inside that locked case rested an encrypted drive connected to months of federal investigative work. Ryan pointed toward the compartment. "There is a lockbox in here." Brooks walked over. The two officers exchanged a look. Ava took a slow breath. Rain began falling again, light at first, creating tiny silver circles across the pavement. Water collected on the motorcycle seat and rolled down the fuel tank. "What is inside the box?" Brooks asked. Ava chose her words carefully. "Personal work materials." Ryan laughed softly. "That sounds official." Ava met his gaze. "Because it is." The answer only seemed to deepen their suspicion. A pickup truck slowed while passing beneath the overpass. The driver stared for several seconds before continuing down the highway. The scene now felt frozen in time. Flashing lights. Falling rain. Three people standing in a pool of uncertainty. Brooks extended his hand toward the saddlebag. "Can you open it?" Ava hesitated. For the first time that night, her calm expression cracked ever so slightly. The encrypted drive inside the lockbox was not supposed to leave her possession. Losing it was not an option. Allowing unauthorized access was even worse. Yet refusing a direct request would only escalate the situation. Ryan noticed her hesitation immediately. "Problem?" he asked. Ava looked at the lockbox, then back at the officers. Thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the horizon. The sound seemed to linger over the highway like a warning. She knew this moment mattered. What neither officer understood was that they were no longer dealing with a simple traffic stop. Without realizing it, they had stepped directly into the edge of something far larger than themselves, and every decision made during the next few minutes would send events in a direction none of them could yet see. The rain grew steadier as Ava looked at the lockbox resting inside the saddlebag. Tiny drops tapped against the black metal surface, creating a soft rhythm beneath the distant hum of traffic. Officer Ryan Mitchell shifted his weight and crossed his arms. The impatience on his face was becoming harder to hide. Sergeant Brooks remained silent, watching carefully. Ava understood exactly how the situation appeared from their perspective. A woman riding an expensive motorcycle late at night. A secured container she seemed reluctant to discuss. Vague answers about work. Piece by piece, they were building a story in their minds. The problem was that none of those pieces belonged to the real story. Ava slowly reached into her jacket pocket and removed a keycard attached to a plain black lanyard. She held it for a moment before unlocking the saddlebag compartment. The latch clicked softly. Ryan immediately stepped closer. The beam from his flashlight swept across travel documents, a rain cover, a pair of riding gloves, and finally the small reinforced lockbox secured to an interior mounting bracket. "There it is," Ryan said quietly. Brooks knelt beside the motorcycle and examined the container. It was compact, matte black, and deliberately plain. No labels. No markings. Nothing that explained its purpose. "Open it," Ryan said. Ava felt the knot in her chest tighten slightly. Her training taught her to remain composed, but training did not eliminate responsibility. The encrypted drive inside represented months of work involving confidential witnesses, financial records, and information that had not yet reached a courtroom. She carefully chose her words. "I cannot authorize access to its contents." Ryan looked up sharply. "Cannot or will not." Cannot. The distinction mattered. Ryan did not seem interested in the difference. Rainwater dripped from the brim of his patrol cap as he straightened. "That sounds like a refusal." Ava remained calm. "It is not a refusal. It is a restriction." Brooks studied her face. For the first time all evening, something resembling uncertainty crossed his expression. Most people confronted by police pressure became nervous, defensive, or argumentative. Ava was none of those things. She spoke with confidence, but without arrogance. Respectfully, but without surrendering her position. It was the behavior of someone accustomed to responsibility. Yet Ryan appeared increasingly convinced he was uncovering something suspicious. He reached for his radio and requested additional verification through dispatch. The static crackled through the humid night air. Several long seconds passed before a response came back. Nothing unusual appeared under the motorcycle registration. No warrants. No alerts. No outstanding investigations connected to Ava Johnson. Ryan frowned. Instead of reassuring him, the clean record seemed to frustrate him. A pair of headlights approached and slowed. A family sedan rolled past beneath the overpass. Inside, a young boy pressed his face against the window, staring at the scene before disappearing into the darkness. Ava watched the taillights fade. She suddenly felt very tired. The exhaustion from months of work was catching up to her. She thought about her empty house waiting 2 hours away, the quiet living room, the coffee maker she had not used in weeks, the rare chance to sleep without a phone ringing at 3 in the morning. All of it felt impossibly distant now. Brooks finally spoke. "Miss Johnson, help me understand something." Ava turned toward him. "Yes, sir." The older officer gestured toward the lockbox. "Whatever is inside there, you are protecting it more carefully than most people protect themselves." Ava hesitated. Thunder rolled again across the horizon. The flashing patrol lights reflected in pools of rainwater scattered across the pavement. "Some things affect more people than we realize," she answered softly. Brooks held her gaze. Something about the response seemed to linger with him. But before he could say another word, Ryan's radio suddenly crackled again. This time the voice on the other end sounded sharper, more urgent. And the moment Ava heard the change in tone, she knew the night was about to take a very different turn. The radio hissed with static before a dispatcher's voice emerged through the rain. The words were partially drowned by passing traffic, but the urgency was impossible to miss. Ryan immediately lifted the radio closer to his ear. His confident expression faded ever so slightly as he listened. Brooks stepped nearer. "What is it?" Ryan did not answer right away. He stared toward the lockbox, then toward Ava, then back at the radio. Whatever information dispatch was providing had clearly complicated the situation. The rain continued falling in thin silver lines beneath the highway lights. Water streamed along the edge of the shoulder and disappeared into a drainage channel. Ava remained motionless. Her eyes stayed on the officers while her mind worked through possibilities. There were only a handful of reasons someone from a communications center would suddenly change tone during a routine stop. None of them were good. Ryan lowered the radio slowly. "Dispatch says there is an administrative flag connected to the name." Brooks frowned. "What kind of flag?" Ryan shook his head. "Restricted access." The older officer blinked. "Restricted by whom?" Ryan looked frustrated. "They are not saying." A long silence followed. The answer created more questions than it resolved. Brooks glanced toward Ava again. For the first time that evening, doubt appeared in his posture. Not doubt about her. Doubt about the assumptions that had guided the entire encounter. Yet Ryan seemed unwilling to let go of those assumptions. He stepped toward the motorcycle and inspected the saddlebag once more. "People hide behind restricted records all the time," he muttered. Ava said nothing. She knew exactly what the administrative flag meant. Federal systems often placed protective barriers around sensitive personnel and active investigations. The purpose was simple. The wrong information in the wrong hands could compromise years of work. Unfortunately, those safeguards often looked suspicious to people who did not understand them. Another burst of static crackled from the radio. Ryan listened again. This time his jaw tightened. Brooks noticed immediately. "Ryan." The younger officer exhaled slowly. "Dispatch says the restricted flag came from a federal channel." Brooks looked toward Ava. Rainwater glistened on her jacket. Her expression remained calm despite the growing tension. "Federal?" Brooks repeated. "That is what they said." The older officer folded his arms and looked out across the highway. A tractor-trailer roared past, sending a wave of mist into the air. For several seconds nobody spoke. The flashing lights reflected across the wet pavement like fractured pieces of color. Ava could feel the night shifting. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to sense the direction changing. The certainty that had surrounded the officers earlier was beginning to crack. Ryan noticed it too. That seemed to irritate him more than anything. He walked several steps away before turning back. "Then why not tell us who you are?" he asked. Ava answered honestly. "Because some jobs require discretion." Convenient answer. It is the truthful one. Brooks studied her carefully. He remembered the way she had spoken earlier. The confidence, the composure, the absence of fear. Most people caught in a stressful situation became emotional. Ava had remained respectful from the beginning. Consistent, controlled, professional. The pieces were finally starting to fit together, just not in the way he originally expected. Then something unexpected happened. Ryan reached toward the saddlebag while repositioning it for another look. The motorcycle shifted slightly on its stand. The lockbox, still secured but not fully seated after the inspection, slid against the mounting bracket. Ava's heart skipped. "Careful," she said immediately. Ryan froze. The box settled back into place without falling. Nothing was damaged. Nothing was lost. Yet for the first time that evening, genuine concern flashed across Ava's face. Not for herself. For what the box represented. Brooks noticed. He saw it instantly. Whatever was inside mattered deeply to her. Not because of money. Not because of personal gain. Because of responsibility. And standing beneath the rain and flashing lights, Sergeant Daniel Brooks began to realize they might be dealing with someone whose purpose that night was far bigger than either of them had imagined. The rain softened into a steady whisper against the concrete above them. For the first time since the stop began, nobody seemed interested in speaking. Officer Ryan Mitchell stood near the patrol car with his radio clipped to his shoulder, staring into the darkness beyond the highway, as if answers might appear there. Sergeant Daniel Brooks remained beside the motorcycle, his eyes occasionally drifting toward the lockbox before returning to Ava. The flashing lights continued their endless cycle across the wet pavement, turning every puddle into a mirror of red and blue. Ava folded her arms lightly against the cool night air. The exhaustion she had been holding back all evening settled deeper into her bones. 8 months. That number kept returning. To her mind. 8 months of missed sleep. 8 months of careful decisions. 8 months of protecting people who would never know her name. Most of them would never even know she existed. That was the strange reality of her work. Success often meant remaining invisible. The best outcome was a future where ordinary families never realized how close danger had come before quietly passing them by. A gust of wind swept beneath the overpass. Water rippled across the shoulder. Somewhere in the distance a train horn echoed through the darkness. The sound carried a memory with it. Ava suddenly remembered sitting on the front steps of her childhood apartment while freight trains rolled through Baltimore late at night. She had been 12 years old. Her mother had just finished a double shift. The refrigerator was nearly empty. Bills sat unopened on the kitchen table. Yet her mother had still found the energy to sit beside her and point toward the tracks disappearing into the horizon. "Never let somebody else tell you where your road ends," she had said. Ava could still hear the words. She could still see the tired smile behind them. Standing beside the highway now, she realized how many times those words had carried her through moments exactly like this one. Moments when people saw limitations before possibilities. Moments when assumptions arrived before understanding. Brooks finally broke the silence. "You know," he said quietly, "most people in your situation would be angry by now." Ava looked at him. The older officer did not sound defensive. He sounded thoughtful. "Being angry would not help anyone," she replied. Brooks nodded slowly. The answer seemed to linger with him. Ryan remained silent. His frustration had gradually been replaced by something else. Uncertainty. The kind that appears when certainty begins to unravel. The radio crackled again. This time, neither officer rushed to answer. The sound faded beneath the rainfall. Ava looked toward the lockbox. Hidden behind reinforced metal and layers of encryption sat information connected to dozens of lives. Witnesses. Financial analysts. Families who had trusted federal investigators to protect them. None of those people knew she was standing on the shoulder of a highway in the middle of the night. None of them knew how close months of work had come to unnecessary complications. Yet that responsibility was exactly why she remained calm. The situation was never really about her. It never had been. A pair of headlights appeared far down the interstate. Then another set. Then several more. At first they looked like ordinary traffic. But as the lights drew closer, something felt different. The vehicles maintained perfect spacing. Their movement was coordinated. Deliberate. Brooks noticed them too. He narrowed his eyes. Ryan followed his gaze. The approaching lights reflected across the wet roadway like a moving ribbon of white and silver. Ava felt her pulse quicken slightly for the first time all evening. Not from fear. Recognition. Deep down, she already knew what was coming. The long, quiet stretch of uncertainty was ending. Somewhere beyond the curtain of rain, answers were finally on their way. The convoy emerged from the rain like a line of shadows moving with purpose. 3 black sport utility vehicles exited the interstate and rolled toward the shoulder with precise spacing. Their headlights cut through the mist, illuminating the overpass in sharp, white beams. Ryan Mitchell straightened immediately. Brooks lowered his arms. Neither officer spoke. The vehicles came to a stop several yards away. Engines idled. Rain tapped against metal roofs. For a brief moment, the entire scene felt suspended between questions and answers. Then the driver's door of the lead vehicle opened. A tall man stepped out wearing a dark overcoat despite the weather. His posture was calm, deliberate, the kind of presence that naturally drew attention without demanding it. Ava recognized him instantly. Director Michael Hayes. Behind him emerged several men and women carrying federal credentials clipped beneath their jackets. They moved quickly but professionally. No panic, no confusion, just purpose. Hayes walked directly toward the patrol cars. Water splashed beneath his polished shoes. His expression remained neutral until his eyes landed on Ava. Only then did he slow slightly. "Agent Johnson," he said, "I have been trying to reach you for 40 minutes. The words seemed to drain all remaining certainty from the highway shoulder. Ryan blinked. Brooks froze. Even the younger officer standing near the second patrol car looked confused. Hayes turned toward the officers. "Which one of you initiated this stop?" Ryan stepped forward. "I did, sir." Hayes studied him for a second. Not angrily, not aggressively, simply studying him. "And did Agent Johnson identify herself?" Ava answered before Ryan could. "No, sir." Hayes looked back at her. "Why not?" "Operational discretion." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "That sounds like you." Brooks glanced between them, slowly piecing together the reality unfolding before him. Agent Johnson, federal convoy, Director Hayes, the restricted records, the protected files. Suddenly, every unanswered question from the last hour had an answer. Ryan remained silent. Rainwater rolled from the brim of his cap. Hayes shifted his attention toward the motorcycle and the lockbox secured inside the saddlebag. His expression immediately became more serious. "Has anyone accessed the contents?" "No, sir," Ava replied. "Good." The single word carried visible relief. One of the federal agents approached and quietly handed Hayes a tablet. He reviewed something on the screen before nodding. Then he looked toward the officers once more. Inside that container is evidence connected to an active federal investigation involving financial crimes across multiple states. Brooks felt his stomach tighten. Ryan stared at the lockbox. "Financial crimes?" Hayes nodded. "The kind that destroy retirement funds, businesses, and entire communities." Silence settled across the group. Rain continued falling. Traffic continued passing. Yet the atmosphere had completely changed. Ava was no longer simply a traveler stopped beside the highway. She was exactly who she had always been, a federal investigator entrusted with something important. Hayes took a step closer to Ryan. His voice remained calm. "I understand you were doing your job tonight." Ryan swallowed. "Yes, sir. But assumptions can become obstacles when they replace facts." The younger officer lowered his eyes. Nobody argued. Nobody interrupted. Because everyone standing there knew the statement was true. Brooks looked toward Ava. For the first time all evening he saw her without the filter of first impressions. Not as a rider on an expensive motorcycle. Not as a stranger beside a highway. But as a professional who had remained respectful through every misunderstanding. Hayes finally turned back toward Ava. "Agent Johnson, we have work to do." Ava nodded once. The rain continued falling softly around them as the truth finally settled over the highway like dawn arriving after a very long night. For several moments nobody moved. The rain continued falling in a steady curtain while the flashing patrol lights reflected across the black federal vehicles lined along the shoulder. Ryan Mitchell stood with his hands at his sides, staring at the wet pavement. The confidence that had carried him through most of the evening was gone. In its place sat a quiet discomfort that seemed heavier than the rain itself. Ava noticed it immediately. She had seen the same expression before. Not only on suspects, not only on witnesses, but on ordinary people confronting a truth they had not expected to find. Director Hayes exchanged a few words with the federal agents gathered near the vehicles before stepping away to take a phone call. That left a brief pocket of silence between Ava and the officers. Sergeant Brooks removed his cap and wiped the rain from the brim. He looked older now somehow. Less certain. More reflective. "Agent Johnson," he said quietly. Ava turned toward him. "Yes, sir?" Brooks exhaled slowly. "I owe you an apology." The words hung in the air. Simple. Direct. Honest. Ava said nothing. She allowed him to continue. "Tonight should have gone differently." His eyes drifted toward the motorcycle. "I thought I was reading the situation correctly." He gave a faint shake of his head. "Turns out I was reading assumptions instead." Ava studied him for a second before offering a small nod. Brooks was not trying to protect his pride. He was accepting responsibility. That mattered. Ryan remained silent. The younger officer seemed trapped in his own thoughts. Finally, he looked up. Rainwater clung to the edge of his uniform collar. "When I first saw you," he admitted, "I made a decision before I knew anything about you." Ava met his eyes. Ryan swallowed hard. The motorcycle. The hour. The situation. "I convinced myself I already knew the story." He looked away briefly. "I never actually gave you a chance to tell it." The highway hummed softly in the background. Tires passed through rainwater. Headlights swept beneath the overpass and vanished into the darkness. Ava remembered her mother's words again. "Never let somebody else tell you where your road ends." She could have responded with anger. She could have listed every unfair assumption she had encountered throughout her life and career. She could have reminded them how exhausting it felt to constantly prove things that others were allowed to assume. Instead, she chose something else. "The truth is," she said calmly, "we all carry assumptions." Ryan looked surprised by the answer. Ava continued, "The important part is what we do when we realize we are wrong." Neither officer spoke. The rain softened further until it became little more than a mist drifting through the glow of the highway lights. Brooks nodded slowly. "That is fair." Ava glanced toward the lockbox still secured inside the saddlebag. Tonight could have become a much bigger problem. Ryan looked at the container and then back at her. But it did not. "No," Ava agreed. Because eventually everyone stopped talking and started paying attention. A faint smile touched Brooks's face. It was the first smile anyone had managed all evening. Nearby, Director Hayes ended his call and began walking back toward the group. The federal agents were already preparing to leave. The tension that had dominated the highway shoulder for hours was slowly dissolving into something quieter, something closer to understanding. Ryan extended his hand. For a moment, he seemed unsure whether the gesture would be accepted. Ava looked at it, then shook it firmly. The rain continued falling around them. Not as a storm anymore. More like a gentle reminder that even difficult nights eventually pass. And standing beneath the fading lights of the patrol cars, the people gathered there understood that the most important lesson of the evening had never been hidden inside the lockbox at all. It had been hidden inside the assumptions they carried before they learned the truth. The federal convoy began pulling away one vehicle at a time, their headlights fading into the wet darkness beyond the interstate. The rain had almost stopped now. Only a fine mist remained, drifting through the glow of the highway lights like silver threads suspended in the air. Ava Johnson stood beside her motorcycle for a moment, listening to the quiet that followed. It was a different kind of silence than the one that had existed earlier that night. Before, the silence had been filled with suspicion and uncertainty. Now it carried reflection. Director Michael Hayes paused beside her before leaving. "You handled that well," he said. Ava looked toward the road stretching endlessly into the distance. "People usually reveal who they are when pressure shows up." Hayes nodded once. "And what did tonight reveal?" Ava thought about the question. She thought about Ryan Mitchell standing under the flashing lights. She thought about Sergeant Brooks admitting he had been wrong. She thought about the long road from Baltimore to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and every assumption she had encountered along the way. "That most people are better than their first mistake," she answered quietly. A faint smile crossed Hayes's face before he climbed into the lead vehicle and disappeared into the night. The highway shoulder grew still again. Brooks adjusted his cap and glanced toward Ava one final time. "Safe ride home, Agent Johnson." "Thank you, Sergeant." Ryan stood a few feet away. The younger officer looked as though he wanted to say something more, but words seemed difficult to find. Finally, he nodded. "I will remember tonight." Ava believed him. "That is enough," she replied. The officers returned to their patrol cars. The emergency lights shut off one by one. For the first time in hours, the overpass returned to darkness. No flashing colors. No tension. Just the soft hum of distant traffic and the smell of rain cooling against concrete. Ava secured the lockbox inside the saddlebag and fastened it carefully. Her hands moved with the practiced precision that had guided her through years of investigations. The responsibility inside had not changed. The mission waiting ahead had not changed. But something else had. Somewhere along the way, a difficult encounter had become a lesson nobody expected. Ava slipped on her gloves and picked up her helmet. As she lowered the visor, she caught her reflection in the motorcycle mirror. Water droplets shimmered across the glass. For a brief second, she saw not only herself, but the little girl from Baltimore who had once sat beside railroad tracks listening to her mother talk about roads and possibilities. The little girl who refused to let other people define her future. The engine came to life with a smooth mechanical growl. The sound echoed beneath the overpass before settling into a steady rhythm. Ava eased onto the highway and accelerated into the darkness. The red motorcycle became smaller and smaller beneath the distant lights until it finally disappeared beyond the curve of the road. Back on the shoulder, Ryan remained seated inside his patrol car. He watched the empty highway through rain-speckled glass. The road looked exactly the same as it had a few hours earlier. Yet somehow it felt different. Because tonight had taught him something no training manual ever could. A uniform could create authority. A title could create status. But neither revealed a person's worth. Only character did. Far ahead, beyond the city lights and the fading storm, Ava continued her journey home. The highway stretched before her, endless and open. And somewhere in the quiet rhythm of the road, justice had spoken without raising its voice. It had arrived not through punishment, not through humiliation, but through understanding. The rain clouds slowly drifted apart. Moonlight touched the wet pavement, and the night moved forward, carrying everyone with it.